speakers is a different perspective about how the shared human traditions of spirituality can educate us in understanding the meaning of economic development and the philosophy and spirit within which it can be promoted. I think these are very, very different perspectives, and I'm very inspired by what has been said already. And it contrasts, frankly, for a professional economist, for the professional economist that I am, it contrasts very much with the way modern economics fancies itself. Modern economics fancies itself as a value-neutral discipline, and perhaps that's even an understatement. The narrative of modern economics often trips into the domain of the anti-religious. Anybody who's taken a conventional economics 1 course will probably vividly recollect a discussion of what's in fancier terms is known as the first theorem of welfare economics, but that is promoted as the idea that the pursuit of self-interest within a competitive market economy somehow by an invisible hand will lead to the social good of social efficiency. Self-interest is promoted in that same narrative, but by what Ayn Rand, the guru of radical free markets, has called in the title of one of her books, The Virtue of Selfishness. And the subtitle is A Concept of Egoism. Now, this is a fallacy. If you look at really what the logic of looking at a competitive market environment implies about individual behavior and social outcome, it has nothing to do with selfishness. And our experience has nothing to do with benefits of selfishness. If you ask me, or you ask an economist, you mean does selfish lying promote economic efficiency? They will say, no, the assumption is market competition, and in a competitive market, you can't lie. You just interact with existing prices. Does cheating, does theft, selfish theft, promote the social good? They'll say, no, in a competitive market, I'm assuming you don't steal, you don't cheat, you act with trust, and so on. So you say, okay, so the proposition is that if you respect other people's rights and are truthful and trustworthy, then pursuing self-interest leads to the social good. They will say yes. You'll say, why should it be self-interest? What if you pursued the golden rule? What if you cared about others? Would that lead to less good? They'll say, no, the important thing is that you don't waste, and the market mechanism will lead to a social outcome that doesn't waste. So you say, this is full promotion of all the traditional values of trust and transparency and truthfulness and preservation of the environment and non-waste. Why do we call it the virtue of selfishness? I want to emphasize this because somehow the economist has lost touch with values, with principles. And I think what this conference should be a lot about is to revive this as an inspiration, as a light in the path of economic prosperity, which from a traditional perspective should be seen as a symptom of good character, of good morals. And economic failure and crisis should be seen as a symptom of missing principles, missing traditional principles. And I think that goes back to what Dr. Santurk pointed out in terms of trying to avoid this economic reductionism. I'll give you one example that's obvious, and then I'll move to the less obvious. I took my first course in economics from a Marxian economist. at Stanford University. In 1981, John Gurley, some of you may know about him, was a neoclassical economist turned Marxian economist, and he taught neoclassical economics in that first course, but never really missed an opportunity to advance some of the Marxian thoughts. And one of the main themes he wanted to put forward in his class was the idea that central planning can work, even though it had not yet succeeded in its implementation. And he used to say capitalism had more than 2,000 years, thousands of years to be developed. Give us time to learn how to regulate centrally the economy, and it will work. Well, history didn't give it time. I think within 10 years, the experiment was abandoned on a global scale. And the issue was not how to regulate the economy centrally. The issue was that that system of centrally planning for outcomes was missing a principle, and the principle is metaphysical. You cannot disconnect the efforts of people, the responsibility of people, the liability of people from the outcomes. Whoever makes the effort gets the outcome, whether a reward or a downfall. And that is a metaphysical principle that defines the dignity of the human being. It is a spiritual principle. And the reflection of that principle in economic life cannot be violated without the economy faltering, without the economy collapsing. That is the missing principle, and it is a spiritual one. I think the question is, are we missing a principle like Marxian economics or communism was missing a principle, and is that principle something that we can learn from the heritage of human spirituality? If you have a table that's missing a leg, you can try to control it by holding it on the left and the right as people use it and making sure it doesn't fall apart. But you are treating symptoms, not causes. I think we need to reconsider the foundations of the market economy and the way its heart, the financial system, works. And I think from that point of view, there are answers. I think our traditions do give us answers and can educate us about some of the issues and mistakes that we have made. I think one of the important things to consider, and this is something that I personally have been working on in the field of finance, is that the idea of exchange, commercial exchange in trade, has a metaphysical foundation, and we can learn from it. In the Quran, one of the verses says, God has purchased from the believers their selves and their wealth, in that theirs will be paradise. That is the supreme trade, the supreme exchange, understood as the exchange of what is ultimately just reflections of reality, reflections of value to higher realities and true intrinsic metaphysical values. And exchange and profitable exchange, profit, is just a reflection of how you give money, which is just a symbol of value, a shadow of value, to gain intrinsic goods. And therein lies genuine, legitimate profit. So with this kind of principle in mind, many of the traditions have looked at exchange, commercial exchange, as legitimately having to do with intrinsic values, exchanging shadows for shadows and seeking profit out of that, whether the shadow is money, whether the shadow is derivatives constructed with some speculative claims on outcomes with no intrinsic value backing. People who build markets based on such exchanges, merchants of shadows, I think of them, are building houses of cards and should not be surprised if they see a chronic tendencies of these houses to collapse and run into crisis and have to be rebuilt again, only to collapse again across markets and across decades. Thank you for your attention.